Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Welcome to today's program. My name is Celia Avila de Santiago, and I have the pleasure of introducing today's panel on behalf of the LGBTQIA Services Committee. For more information on LGBTQIA resources and book lists, please visit lapl.org/pride. Today's Trans 101 panel is designed to educate and inform mental health professionals, educators, and the broader community about the diverse experiences of transgender and non-binary individuals. This event aims to combat misinformation, promote understanding, and provide valuable insights into the challenges faced by the LGBTQ+ community. Before we begin, we'd like to thank our partners at the Los Angeles Psychological Association's Special Interest Group for helping us provide this program. And now we'd like to welcome Dr. E to get this panel started.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Celia. And yes, my name is Dr. Richard Espinoza. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist, and I lead this LGBTQ+ special interest group, which is a part of the Los Angeles County Psychological Association. And we present to you all Trans 101. So this is a panel where we're going to discuss anything and everything related to transgender and non-binary identities. And our aim is to highlight and lift the voices of our esteemed guests, Mr. Frank Pena and Kimberly Cvitkovich, and sharing their experience. So we're going to start with me, and then I'm going to set the framework for all of this. So in a moment, I'm going to share my screen, and we'll take it from here. Okay, so why this panel in the first place? So as we know, LGBTQ+ identification in this country is now estimated at 7.6%. So in other words, that's 25.3 million queer people throughout the United States. So to put it in another context, if all LGBTQ+ people lived in one space, it would be about the size of Texas, which is the second most populous state for this country. So this all said, there's a lot of LGBTQ folks in this country. So let's look at how current events are quickly shaping the landscape for this community. So mental health and LGBTQ related legislation. So the impact of the 2024 legislative environment is significant for all persons. And as such, there's a higher overall health implication for LGBTQ+ folks. So as it stands, there's 530 bills up for voting this year throughout this country that directly impacts the health, the income, financial stability, and psychological well-being of LGBTQ+ individuals of all ages. If anyone wants to stay up to date on this legislation, they can type into a search engine, the American Civil Liberties Union, or ACLU, and find more about this. A third of these 530 bills directly target transgender and non-binary persons. And as such, it's a high probability that you do know gender diverse individuals. So our intention here as an organization of psychotherapists and educators and allies, we would like to combat misinformation and promote understanding on LGBTQ+ issues because it's important now more than ever in this country. So this all said, everyone in the US likely has a connection to a queer person. And either way, your votes will directly impact their lives after the general election this year on November 5th. So we, again, as psychotherapists and educators alike, we feel that hearing the personal accounts of trans and non-binary persons helps us understand how our thoughts, feelings, and our actions indirectly and directly impact their lives. So this all said, what we've got in store for you is something great. So I've began by exploring the reason that trans and non-binary education is important now more than ever in this country. Up next, my colleague Julie will help us explore key terms and essential understandings through the lens of a K-12 educator. Then we'll hear the personal shared experiences from two individuals. We'll be starting with Kim. sharing her personal account of the trans feminine experience later in adulthood. And then following after, we're going to hear from Frank sharing his personal story of the trans masculine experience, navigating the healthcare system within a larger body. Last, I'm going to bookend this first half of the panel and do an analysis and show you all the website of WPATH. And I'll explain what WPATH is at the end of this. Last, the second half of this panel is going to be town hall style. So we openly and warmly invite any and all questions you all may have. And all of the slides and education that we're going to provide, it's going to be available shortly after. And we're going to compile everyone's pieces together, and you'll all be able to have these resources. Just taking a moment for some of the resources I have. And with that said, I'm going to stop my screen share, and I'm going to pass it to my esteemed colleague, Julie Gallus.
Thanks, Dr. E. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this really important conversation. My name is Julie Gallus, and I'm bringing the lens of education, the educator and school experience, specifically for our queer, trans, and non-binary students in the K-12 space. I will also be sharing a slide deck to get us started. Here we go. See, I want to make you all smaller. There we go. Quick trip. These are some things that we're going to be touching upon in my time with you. Vocabulary, common myths and misinformation, and then getting into the experience of our young people in schools. And then I do have a resource slide at the end. And as Richard indicated, that will be available to you all as well. It's important to have an understanding of the vocabulary that's commonly used by trans and non-binary individuals as they self-identify, and some of the other terms that happen around this topic as well. Gender is really one of the main aspects of an individual's identity, along with race and ethnicity. And so it is really at the forefront of our minds, whether we are aware of it or not, as we meet other people and as we move through the world ourselves. The world kind of works, especially where we are in what we call the gender binary, where things are generally classified as male or female. Individuals are generally classified as male or female, and our brain tries to categorize them that way because we have grown up in the gender binary. And for many of us, the awareness of genders outside of this binary might be unfamiliar, might be relatively new. So again, it's important to spend a little bit of time with the vocabulary. Non-binary, you'll see some abbreviations or other terms there in parentheses. These are individuals who identify as neither male nor female, sometimes outside the continuum entirely. And sometimes it is also used as a subset of the term transgender. The two aren't the same, and we'll have a little stats on that later. You can see some other common terms there on the lower left used for individuals who do not identify as within that binary two-bucket system. On the right, you'll see, again, common terms, and they can be confused with each other at times, but they are all distinct. So sex assigned at birth is exactly what it sounds like. And this is how medical professionals view a baby's body when that baby is born, and they assign it a sex. The gender identity, however, is how a person sees themselves. So a tiny baby doesn't have a developed gender identity yet, but as the person grows up and they develop all aspects of their identity, they do develop a gender identity and how they see themselves. If their gender identity matches the sex assigned at birth, then they're called a cisgender individual. If that does not match, their inner gender identity and image does not match their external physical body and the sex assigned at birth, then they are transgender. Gender expression is different than gender identity. It's really how a person expresses their particular gender. And this is often done through their clothing choices, makeup, hairstyle, accessories, gestures, expressions, etc. And there's a very, very wide range of gender expression for both cisgender individuals and transgender individuals. Sexual orientation, again, is a completely different access, and axis, and that has to do with how a person relates to other people instead of their own gender identity about themselves. Where are their romantic or emotional attractions or the sexual attractions? And that's sexual orientation. So they're all a little bit different. We have some representations, visual representations that can be useful if individuals have questions about these concepts. Sometimes it's nice to represent them in a visual way, especially if we're dealing with parents who have questions, or their child has perhaps disclosed or questioned about them and things like that. So these are sort of two fun representations using the same language and vocabulary that I've just been talking about. There is another term that is used, SOGI, and you can see that SOGI is an acronym for sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression. And it's important to note that SOGI isn't just about LGBTQ plus folks. Every single person has a SOGI. Everyone has a sexual orientation, a gender identity, and how they express their gender. So you can think about what you would classify as your particular SOGI. But that is a term that also comes into play for many of these conversations. I want to go through some stats, and this gets into, it touches on some of the things that Richard also said and starts talking about our youth in particular. This is from a national survey, particularly of LGBTQ youth. 13 to 24-year-olds across the US, almost 35,000 of them a couple of years ago. And the Trevor Project does a lot of this research, and there are surveys of one kind or another every year. But here you can see, again, of the individuals who filled out the survey, all of whom identify in the LGBTQ range, 1 in 4 of them, 26%, identified as non-binary. Half of them also claimed the transgender term. Again, they're not interchangeable, but some folks claim both terms, non-binary and transgender, and some don't. It was interesting with these statistics that the rates of identifying as non-binary were relatively comparable across races and ethnicities, and that held pretty constant. 51% of the US population of young adults, so these are slightly older individuals, 18 to 29, they identify as transgender or non-binary, and you can see that particular breakdown there. So this is where our young people are headed. Our youth are going to be 18 to 29, and already 5% of the population is claiming these identities. 13 to 17-year-olds that identify particularly as transgender in the US, 300,000 of them. So it is a sizable, notable population that does need attention and care. It's 1.4% of the population. If we shift our attention to California, there's almost 50,000 young people, 13 to 17-year-olds, almost 2% of the youth population that identify as transgender. So it is worthy of our attention as educators, mental health professionals, other people who may work with the youth population. Here are a few common misconceptions that we often hear. This feeling, they all have to do with this feeling like this didn't exist before. Now, all of a sudden, there are all of these trans and non-binary people. And we need to think about what has changed in society rather than what has changed in individuals, because the reality is trans and non-binary people have always existed in all cultures across the world. But more societal acceptance has arisen recently, and so people feel more comfortable coming out. They feel more comfortable claiming these terms that perhaps a generation ago were not part of the common vocabulary or language of young people growing up. So there aren't more necessarily, but there are more that you may know or see, or people may claim that. It's not a new trend, but there is new language. It used to be the surveys never asked about anything outside the binary, male or female, and now surveys are starting to do that. And so we can gather some data and track how individuals, and percentages of individuals who are identifying in these ways. In schools, often we hear concern from parents or teachers that this is somehow a phase that young people are going through. And it's generally not the case. Studies show that gender identity remains relatively constant once it is solidified. People may or may not disclose. They may know internally, and we'll talk about that in a moment. There have been some press about detransitioning, and the rates are actually quite low. And when you drill down into why someone might transition and then detransition, a lot of times, very unfortunately, it has to do with societal pressure or family rejection, that the pain of actually living authentically is too great. And people then say, I just won't. I will just go back to what everyone else expects of me. And that unfortunately usually has a very significant mental health toll on the individual. Working in K-12 spaces, a lot of people have questions about children and the development of gender identity in children. So you can see here some of the data around that from the American Academy of Pediatrics. By the time kids are about 4, they have developed a relatively stable sense of their gender identity. Now, they may not have all of the words to describe it. If they don't feel that their gender identity matches with expectations of them, they may or may not say anything about it. They may or may not feel that that is acceptable, or they may, again, might not even have the language, but some sense of gender identity for all children really starts to develop kind of right before they're looking at kindergarten. Again, when they disclose, totally different question. And often there is a big gap. You'll see the stats here on the screen. Self-realization around 8, average age of disclosure 15 and a half. So 7.6 years of incongruence, knowing that they have this dissonance between their self-realization of gender and how they're actually living or what they have told others. That's a long time to live in that incongruence. And again, often it's very, very taxing on the mental health of our youth. They may feel afraid, they may feel shame, they may feel isolation, and it can be very, very difficult. So what do we see in schools? Well, if children feel safe and they're in affirming environments and adults around them have indicated acceptance of trans and non-binary individuals, we see some patterns when children might disclose. And the first is that 4 to 5 age that I mentioned earlier. And then again, right before kids are starting to go through the early stages of puberty, because now they're faced with the fact that their physical body may start to change and develop in ways that make them distinctly uncomfortable and not in alignment with how they feel inside. And then the third time is transition to high school. Often kids are starting a new school, they want a fresh start, and they choose to live more authentically. Couple of slides here, again, from research from the Trevor Project, and I've just put a red box around the stats for transgender and non-binary individuals, and this slide is about anxiety and depression symptoms. You can see that they're too high across the board. All of the data on here is unfortunate and too high, but you will also see the significantly higher amounts of anxiety and depression symptoms experienced by transgender and non-binary individuals. The next slide is similar, but instead of anxiety and depression, it's looking at suicidality, rates of considered and attempted suicide. And again, that red box, the numbers for transgender and non-binary individuals is significantly higher. And of course, way, way higher than we would want, than we would wish for any young person at all. And so again, this is really important, those of us who work with youth, to be aware of. Impact of gender diversity on school experiences in particularly, you can see there that school is often a negative experience for our trans and non-binary kids. Often they experience fear, they experience harassment, they perhaps feel unsafe, perhaps don't want to go to school, and they miss school, and it's hard for them to learn. It's really challenging if your brain is preoccupied with fear or with shame or some kind of, carrying this weight of not disclosed. It's hard to learn. And so they do also experience challenges in academic performance. And again, we would not want that for any of our youth. This is the resource slide. There's a lot of really fabulous information, resources from organizations, some national and some local. And on the slides, these are all clickable links to go to these places. There's information for parents, there's information for educators, and there's a lot of training and just general information and support out there as well. This final slide has my contact information. My school is Chrysalis Academy, which is designed for queer, trans, and non-binary middle schoolers. And I'm happy to answer questions during our question and answer time or to be a resource for anyone. So with that, I will stop sharing mine, and I have the delight and pleasure of handing over to Kim.
Hey, Julie, thank you. Give me just a minute to get my slides up here. Ah. Okay, can everybody see that? I'll take
Yes, we
that.
can, Kim.
Okay, thanks. So, hi, everyone. My name's Cris Cvitkovich. I am a trans woman. My pronouns are she and her. The topic of my talk today is living with ghosts, and I'll get into that more through the discussion. But basically, what I'm going to talk to you about is what it meant to me to come out very late in life as a trans woman. And a lot of the stuff also that you'll hear if you think back to just a few minutes ago, a lot of Julie's slides called out some information that really parallels what I went through when I was younger, as far as ages and things like that. And I find that very interesting myself, even. So I think that upholds a lot of what Julie was saying. I first realized that I was trans, even though I didn't have the language for it at the time, when I was about 8 years old. I remember watching the news one night with my parents, and there was a special report that came on about Christine Jorgensen, who was one of the first American trans women, or at least popular ones. And when I saw her story and heard it, I just thought, wow, that's like me. That's kind of how I feel. But my parents, while they were very good parents and very loving, I could tell that, through their reactions to this story, that they were probably not the right people for me to try to talk to first. So I held it in and continued to hold it in for most of my life now. But it just really, it came doing that, it came out of a lot of guilt and feelings of humiliation and parental anger, of course, and also the fear of just getting made fun of from my friends at school. So there were a lot of reasons to sort of stay in the closet, if you will. So throughout life, I was able to put the feelings aside, bury them, but they never disappeared completely. There was always something going on in my head, and for some reason, these feelings would just pop back into my head from time to time. For the most part, I kept going on with my life. I studied, I did what I needed to do to get through and to become an adult. But every so often, I would just be taken aback by having these feelings. And at this point, because I had kept it buried for so long, by the time I was older, say in high school, I really didn't understand it anymore because it wasn't clear any longer that that was the issue, that I might be trans. But I knew that there was something, and so I just kept hiding it because I didn't even have a good definition for it myself at this point. Time went on, went through college, ended up getting married, having children, and I loved all of that. And honestly, there is nothing that I regret about the life that I've lived. But at the same time, those feelings never fully went away. They just kept coming back and coming back and haunting me, just like a ghost. So finally, as things would have it, ended up getting a divorce, not related at all to being trans or anything around that. But this was about 12 years ago or so, and about 10 years ago, um, one night I just had a realization. These feelings started coming back, and it really hit me very hard that, um, gosh, I think I might be transgender, and I started to understand it, and that literally led to about 8 years of therapy and counseling, along with 8 years of self-doubt and denial, because as I developed a sense of what these feelings have meant all my life, then I got even more scared, because how do I now I have kids, people that grew up depending on me, um, people that I love deeply, and how do I tell them? What are they going to think of me? Um, what is my family going to think of me? What about all my friends? I'm a working musician. Will I ever perform again? Will people that I work with want to work with me? Will audiences accept me? So there's all these things swirling around in my head, and um, and it was tough. It was tough. So for about 8 years, I worked with a therapist, and then finally, I realized that, um, I in order for me to answer these questions that I was having, or these feelings, the only way for me to answer that, and this is just the way I'm wired, but I didn't want there to be any choice in the matter. Um, Even my therapist had told me at one point, look, you're doing the right thing, you're feeling the right way. I see it in you, I hear it in you. It's fine. Be okay with yourself. But to me, that if I had listened to her at the time, that meant that I would have let her influence my decision to a point. And I didn't want to have a decision, and I didn't want to have any outside influence. Um, so after all of that, I end up coming out to the kids finally. Um, and everything worked out fine. And they were both behind me 100%, and they both still are. Um, but then once that happened, I ended up going back into the closet for approximately 2 more years. Again, because like I said, I didn't want there to have to be a decision made or a choice. Um, I wanted it to just be me. And I didn't feel like that's where I was mentally at the time. I finally got to a point where, and some of this sounds a little crazy maybe, but um, I would close my eyes at night when I was trying to fall asleep, and I would have visions of myself as a woman, and I couldn't go to sleep. It would take me, 10, 20, 30 minutes to finally just fall asleep out of exhaustion. But it wouldn't go away. These images just kept coming back every night, every night. Finally, after a couple of, well, another little side story, I ended up going to the doctor and had to have some tests run. And the nurse that was uh, doing the testing, um, we're in the room together, and we're just talking as she's doing her job. And she started telling me, well, something about being like me, people like me. And I said, wait, what do you mean people like me? And she said, well, trans people like you. And I was shocked, because at this point I was only out to my kids, but no one else. And so I talked to her about it, and she said, well, I could just see it in you. It's just you. And I just feel it. And that just blew my mind. So finally, after having all these visions, hearing her just kind of read me, okay, for no apparent reason, nothing I did that was trying to get myself read, I finally realized that I don't have a choice anymore, that I am a trans woman, and that's it. There's no decision to make, there's no choice. That's just me. And so finally, I decided to come out to all my friends and family. So that was the next step, and started with some friends, and turns out that everybody in my family and all of my friends were very loving, very accepting, and are still there with me through this whole journey. So I've been very blessed about that. And that does not track with the experience of a lot of trans people. Um, so that's part of the reason that I'm here speaking with you today, is that I feel like I owe it to some people in the community to try to help educate others um, about what it means to be trans. But along the way, as I was coming out to family and friends, I got some interesting questions and comments from people. And this kind of veers off of the age thing, but um, they're interesting nonetheless. So one was, that's fine, I love you, but I could never call you Kim. And at first I was okay with that. But it doesn't play well with me. I feel that person needed some educating. And so I tried to do that. Unfortunately, that one didn't go so well. But so far, everybody else is okay with it. Another comment I got was, "Oh, all right, so you're into guys. So what? A lot of people are gay. So what?" And I was like, "Hold on, and these are people that I'm talking to that are well educated. I had a career in high tech for over 40 years. These were a lot of friends of mine from that field, people that I thought would understand some of these concepts. But me telling them that I'm transgender, to them, they interpreted that as, oh, you're gay. No, I'm not. Never have been into men, still not. Um, so I had to do some educating there as well. And then probably the funniest one was when I told one friend of mine, and and he hugged me and congratulated me and told me all these great things, way more positivity than I could ever expect. And then he closed with, "Hey, send me some pictures." And I was like, "What? What do what kind of pictures do you want?" And then I thought about it for a second, and I thought, "Oh my God, he thinks I'm a drag queen." And I couldn't be further from the truth, right? So I had to educate him on what it means to be a trans woman, at least from my perspective. And we all have our own individual perspective on life. And then finally, a comment that many people made to me, because I was 66 years old when I finally came out to everyone. The comment was, "Too bad you had to wait so long to come out." And it's one of the most well-meaning things people could ever say to me, and I really appreciate it. But I'll say this, and again, this is my perspective, my life. I have no regrets about any part of my life. Um, the the living in the closet, if you will, from the time I was 8 years old all the way through school, getting married, having children, all of that was great, and there's nothing to regret. Um, but so I keep that. But going forward, I'm living my life as Kim, and that is what makes me happy today. So here I am about a year and a half after starting HRT full time, and there's a lot of expectations out there about the effects of HRT on trans women. Um, when you're my age, some of this is just me and my own personal physiology, but when you're my age, the effects of hormones are not as much as you would hope for. Um, And so some of them are listed here. So physically, minor changes to the texture of the skin. It's a little softer. Your hair dries out, quits falling out, thank God. And facial and body hair grows slower. But in terms of like breast development, little to none. But I did experience a loss of muscle mass and strength. And that came very early on, probably within the first 6 months of being on HRT full time. Emotionally, a lot of changes, increased emotional sensitivity. It's easier for me to cry at things, and to let those types of emotions out. But at the same time, I'm much calmer than I used to be. And even though I'm more emotionally sensitive, it's not in a negative way. I don't get angry as often or get heated about things. I tend to listen better and just take things better and be more be a better listener and look at the world around me in a little different light. And overall, a feeling of just more happiness. And that one's hard to really describe, but it has made a huge difference in my life on a daily basis. And so today, my life is really just about self-acceptance. I have gotten over the idea of caring about what others think. I appreciate myself and I accept myself for who and what I am. And I want everyone to know who I am. I'm proud of it. And I also feel that it's important for me to try to help others learn how important it is to be true to yourself, especially young people as they're coming up, so that they can avoid living a life that has all the guilt and shame and fear and lies that I had to go through to get where I am today. So yeah, that's the end of the presentation, but yeah, I hope that that sheds a little bit of light on one real world experience anyway. And now I'm going to turn it over to Frank, and he can tell you how his experience has been.
All right, thank you, Kev. Hi, everyone. My name is Frank, Frank Pena. I use he, him, and his pronouns. Some identities I hold. I'll start with the fun ones. I always say there's kind of like a buy one, get one free sale when I came out. So I am a gay trans man, meaning I have 2 letters in the acronym, the G and a T. And I'm also Chicano. I'm also a person of a larger body. And then like the least fun part about me is I'm a clinical social worker. It's still kind of cool, but it's the least fun part about me. And let's see. So I think kind of beginning with my experience, I came out around 17-ish years old, and I began transition at 18 years old, and we'll talk about that more. But I think kind of going into my childhood, it very much, as Kim said, really aligns with a lot of what Julie has shared, is like, I really had a sense of myself from a really young age and knew that I couldn't be that person. I didn't have the words to articulate. I knew my role. I am the eldest daughter in a very traditionally Catholic family, and so Latino household as well. And so just kind of that dynamic was like, you need to know your place, and this is the mold that has been set out in front of you, and this is how you need to fill that mold, and this is how the family is just going to cohesively go on. And so I always really just felt detached from my body and very always outside looking in. I always felt like I was just floating above and looking down at me, kind of like this little puppet, if you will. And it was just a really uncomfortable feeling. And from a young age as well, I was always very more masculine presenting, and I was always labeled a tomboy. In grade school, people would sometimes call me like lesbo or dyke and things like that. And like, I remember sometime in middle school also thinking like, I just wish I was lesbian so I can just come out and move on with my life. Like, and because I have lesbian family members, and like, so for me it was like more positively accepted. So I'm like, I wish that was the answer so I could just move on. But that wasn't the case. And I think kind of my sense of attraction always being to men kind of, I think, put a little bit of a time lapse in there. I used to often, kind of to Kim's point earlier, people assuming like, oh, like, so you like men, and people, that was kind of the assumption of like, oh, like you're transitioning like to like because you like women, and it's not always the case. So I even myself was had that ideology growing up of like your sexual orientation and your gender identity are fused together, and that's not the case at all. So kind of, I think some with time I was able to have better language to articulate myself, and knew that my attraction and my identity was vastly different. And as I mentioned, I came out at 18 years old, and that kind of really came to a friend who had come out as gay and asked me to accompany him to a youth center that was for LGBTQ youth and young adults, which was a place I later worked at for many years. But I went just as a straight ally friend and just being a good friend to my gay friend. And honestly, I went and I never left. And that was kind of the space where I was able to meet other trans folks and kind of like, oh my God, that missing puzzle piece. And that was the word I've been looking for since I was like 6 years old, and here it is. And really from that moment forward, I just kind of hit the ground running, and thankfully I had a bunch of support around me from friends that I had made at the Z space, and folks who worked there, who were very connected to local resources, and just kind of got me, like really raised me and took care of me. That is when I began my transition, and started going by Frank and using different pronouns with friends. And but I was still like living a double life with my family. I wasn't out yet. And so around 18 years old, I began my medical transition, which I was like, will always emphasize is that our no transitions look the same. Like we kind of use a word that we talk about what is affirming, called gender affirming care. What is affirming for that person? So for me, what was affirming for me was to begin taking testosterone injections at the age of 18, because I honestly knew my parents would never sign off on it. That essentially puts you through a natal male puberty. Everything you know about male puberty, that essentially is the changes I had. I will just say that this second puberty was a lot more fun than the first one. Then some around that time, same time, I also was like, I definitely can't keep this with my parents because changes are going to be starting to happen. So I need to come out to them. And so I did come out, and they definitely really struggled with it. And I will still say that we're a work in progress. But it was kind of a lot of roller coaster. And I can say that my family was the most difficult part of my transition. I was very fortunate to have very supportive systems outside of my family, from friends and workplaces, and even in my school systems. Like all that was always supportive, and I have always felt safe in that regard. And I owe that also to just the privilege of stepping into male privilege as well. So that is definitely a piece of that. But I was very fortunate to have that support space. So kind of fast forwarding a bit through my transition, I later had what the community refers to as top surgery, and also what the medical community will say like is called a radical hysterectomy. Really, all in kind of simplified terms, is I had my breast tissue removed, so I have a more masculine, flat appearing chest. And I also call it a designer chest because they like do a lot of fancy stuff. So I have a nice designer chest. And I've also had all of my internal reproductive organs removed. So a lot of changes with that. But kind of, I think really into my main point that I really want to emphasize today is navigating the medical system as a trans person, but also navigating the medical system as a person of a larger body. Now, there's definitely a lot of, fat phobia within the medical system, and sometimes it's like overlooked. But this is kind of like just to give you a kind of glimpse of what this looks like is when I was about 13 years old, 12 years old, and began menstruating. I had a lot of irregular menstrual cycles, and it was very painful, and there was just a lot of discomfort. And every single doctor, because my mom was like, that's not normal, we got to take the doctor, went to multiple doctors, and every single doctor was lose weight and your menstrual cycles will get better. And that was always the solution to every single thing. Your knee hurts, your head hurts. Like, most people say like, oh, everyone always tells me to drink water. No, every doctor's always told me, just lose weight and it'll solve all your problems. And in some cases, I'm not going to lie, like that would be beneficial and helpful for some folks, right? But not always, right? And so here is kind of this medical system that, and that's just very much a tone that I've always received, and other people of larger body have received. And so that really carried into my transition as far as now navigating, like, I need surgical operations, like I need gender affirming care, what that looked like for accessing hormones and what that looked like for surgeries was also a part of that. And so in that very same regard, I went to a consultation for a top surgeon, and like already, and I want to kind of also paint this picture of like, this is already not an easy thing to do, right? You have to like get the insurance on board, and things have positively changed. But at the time, I had to get the insurance on board. I had to book a consultation, which took a lot of time to book. I had to drive like literally across the Bay Area. I'm from the San Jose area. I drove from San Jose to Oakland, which if anyone is familiar with that area, it's a good drive. That's like driving from the Inland Empire to LA, ish, I guess. I don't know, I'm bad at geography. Okay, yeah, just a little bit off, but thank you, Dr. E. And so, but that's a good chunk of driving back and forth. And so for me to finally show up at this appointment for this surgeon, it was like, oh yeah, we could do the surgery, like you're definitely a candidate, yada, yada, yada. I'm like, oh my gosh, the stars are finally aligning. And the surgeon says, yeah, so I'll have my staff book you for sometime in December. I want to note that this was a February conversation. We'll book you for this sometime this December. And if you can between now and then, I would appreciate for you, we would need to lose about 150 pounds between February and December before your surgery date. Like that's not no 5 pounds. Like that's not no like a little quick little liquid diet. That is a lot of weight. And for me, that was very, you know, I mean, quite honestly, I really spiraled after that conversation with that surgeon. I was like, what? Like, I mean, I'm never going to have the surgery. Like, there's no way I'm ever going to be able to lose that amount of weight for surgery. And so I had my moment. I needed to cry. I needed to grieve. I needed to kind of go through all these motions. And then I was like, okay, Frank, like use your big mouth for once. Like, and now like you have to advocate for yourself. And now you got to pick yourself up. And there's kind of a saying in the trans community of like, we're not just trans people. We have to be nurses, doctors, therapists, surgeons, because we have to be privy to all of this language and all of this kind of like access, because we're the only ones speaking up for ourselves in these places and these systems. And so I had to really just I had to just climb the ladder, ruffle all the feathers. And mind you, I had gone through 3 different surgeons who'd given me the same answer. And after the 3rd one, I said, okay, I have to, that's what I have to do. And so ultimately, after kind of really twisting their arms and using every single educated word that I have in my brain on them, they ultimately were able to perform a surgery, and they had like all these like extra forms, and they're like, and mostly their whole thing was like, there's like more risk, like there's more there could be more side effects. And I'm kind of like, there already is that, you know, like, so long story short, I survived, I didn't die. And there were no complications. And really kind of what was my main point with surgeons, and kind of really my point here, is that gender affirming care is written in insurance policies as medical necessities. And that is at least true for the state of California. I can't speak for the rest. But I asked the surgeons to treat that as such, as truly as a medical necessity, and kind of gave an example of like, what if I had breast cancer, right? They wouldn't say lose weight and then we'll remove the cancerous tissue. That wouldn't be the case. They would deal with complications on an as-need basis, and I asked that they really adhere to that model. So with that, they were able to do that. And then in that same regard, I also wanted to have a hysterectomy at the time, and they said, yeah, we could do that. Again, there was a weight component there as well, but they also put me through quite a lot of tests of mental health examinations, and it was like a panel of like psychiatrists, essentially therapists, and we're all asking pretty much the same question, just kind of varied in different words, just to see if I would change my answer. And it was always like, do you have someone who could be a surrogate for you? Like, are you sure? Are you sure? Are you sure? And really just kind of overlooking the fact that this was something that was affirming for my gender, and not just like, oh, like I don't want to deal with menstruation anymore, or I just like, you know, like it was just the tone was completely different. And so it wasn't until, so I kind of put that on hold, but down the line after my top surgery, there was some more complications that came up, and these were related to 12-year-old me who was having irregular menstruation cycles, and the surgeon's like, hey, like we need to do surgery like yesterday, and we're booking you. I went in for a doctor's appointment. I was booked for 2 days after that appointment, and all of a sudden that tone of are you sure, who's going to be a surrogate, all this and that went out the window, like, losing weight, things like that, all of that went out the window. And so, just the tone was so different from when I was 12 years old and, hey, lose weight and that's going to be the solution to all your problems, to, are you sure, like you're just, we need to put you through this like really rigorous mental health examination, to, oh, this is actually an emergency and we'll just do the surgery. We like throw whatever risk and complications out the window. And again, long story short, I survived and didn't die. And so it was just a very frustrating system to navigate, like as a person of a larger body, but also like I'm just trying to get my basic needs met. I'm trying to access care that is written into our insurance policy, that that I have the privilege of having insurance that can cover this, like let me access this for myself and what is affirming for me. So it was just a very changing kind of experience, and now, like even then, is like navigating medical system is really hard, as a trans person, but also a person of a larger body, because it's like, okay, like get to the point. You're gonna tell me to lose weight, and that's gonna be the solution to the problem. But that's not always it. So, yeah. So I think, like as I mentioned, family stuff has always been the most difficult. And really, medical things are just very complicated. I have a very complicated relationship with the medical system. And that, I feel like that's also partially why I'm a social worker. But like that's, here I am. So I'm gonna put a pin in there, because like I'll just continue to soapbox ramble. I'm gonna pass it back over to Dr. E, and I look forward to answering any questions y'all may have in our town hall.
So thank you so much, Julie, Kim, Frank. Julie, thank you so much for distilling this necessary, vital information and making it digestible. Kim, thank you so much for sharing your personal experience and sharing just that vulnerability. And same to you, Frank, both of you. Thank you so much for being vulnerable, sharing candid experiences in our best efforts as a collective to just humanize this experience. As I say one more time, we have 530 anti-LGBTQ bills up for election this year. And again, your votes will directly and indirectly impact the lives of people like who just spoke in this moment. So let me bookend this first half of the panel with sharing my screen one more time and showing you WPATH standards. Okay, so WPATH stands for World Professional Association for Transgender Health. This is a global, this is a global organization through a scientific lens, which helps explain anything and everything. So especially for those watching this recording at a later time who aren't able to participate in the town hall we're about to have, this is an excellent resource. Again, our other panelists have provided resources and will provide contact information for consultation and to be a resource themselves. And still, again, for those viewing this recording, this WPATH, so wpath.org, it's an excellent resource to explain just how we provide best practices and just understandings, and just an expansion on everything we're trying to distill in this conversation that we're having. So that said, let me just briefly scan over. And I also want to note that this website, wpath.org, is an excellent pathway to other regional associations, such as the United States Professional Association for Transgender Health and EPATH. So here you'll be able to see the current version 8 standards of care for providers. You'll see public policy statements, and if you are in a transitional space or just are identified as transgender and non-binary and wish to receive affirming care, no matter where you are on this planet, the Find a Provider link is essential. That all said, I want to then shift gears again to those viewing this recording. If you're viewing this recording, unfortunately, you're not able to participate in the town hall we're about to have, But that said, if you want to stay up to date on the current events and other programs being put on by the fantabulous Los Angeles Public Library, lapl.org will provide this. One of the last things I want to say in the spirit of combating misinformation and providing accurate information is how one does their own research. I know a lot of people say that phrase, so here it is. One quick step is make sure the sources you're going to are reputable. How do we do that? Well, that's a larger conversation, but one of the quick tips right now that I'll share is look at, if it's online, look where the website is. If it's a .org, .gov, .edu, oftentimes .net, that means these run through bodies that fact check and make sure this actually helps people. If you see .com, that doesn't mean it's a bad thing, but just be a little more stringent, be a little more mindful when you check the source, because .com, .company, .commerce, someone is making money when you see a .com, which isn't always a bad thing, but just be mindful of the source. Okay. I'm about to stop sharing my screen. So that all said, thank everybody one last time for showing up this afternoon at the time of this recording. Again, if you are viewing this recording, all of the resources we have here will be available. If you're questioning, curious, or wishing to be an ally or support somebody, if perhaps you're a healthcare provider wishing to understand and get a better depth of WPATH standards, it's all here. So with that all said, we will shift to the town hall section. So please feel free to ask anything and everything, any questions or comments you may have. Remember that our intention is to call people in, not call people out. So we just understand everybody's going to maintain decorum and be respectful and hopefully have a just wonderful, fruitful conversation.